Hello and welcome back to another early adopter video, and this one is on my first stereotype. So we're going to be talking about getting into stereotypes, different element applications, some best practices, very important section, when to add custom stereotypes, and then we're going to create a custom stereotype to help you get started. So let's start out with what is a stereotype? And stereotypes are a way to extend UML modeling elements with custom characteristics specific to your domain or project requirements. In the last video, early adopter video, we talked about tagged values. And this one I wanted to get into stereotypes. Probably should have talked about stereotypes first, but they both go hand in hand when customizing your elements and tailoring your models to what you're trying to accomplish, the meaning of the models, turning your ideas and visions into graphical images and representation. So let's jump into it right now. So as stated, stereotypes are a way of extending the UML modeling elements with custom characteristics specific to your domain or project requirements. So let's go up to the settings tab again. We're going to go to UML types in the reference data panel and open up this dialog box. In UML types, we have stereotypes, tagged values, and then cardinality. We also have the notion of constraints, but we'll talk about that later. And when you're in here, you have the ability to choose from many canned stereotypes. There are some custom stereotypes, microservices for object or microservices for class, and a couple of others here that we'll talk about in the video. All right. So the first thing that we want to do is we're going to bring in a class element right here, and we're going to double click it to open up properties. Another way to open up properties is to right click and then go to properties. You can bring up the dialog box. And of course, you can always get the properties through the properties window. And mine's in the lower right in the default. It may be in the lower right, but the bottom line is we want to be able to get to this. And let's go ahead and double click this and open up the dialog box and start here. So in this dialog box for a class element, we have a field in here, a data field for selecting a stereotype. Let's go ahead and hit the edit button, and we can go in here, and with the perspective, all perspectives turned on, profiles is set to none, we have these selections. And in here, we have one selection, and we're just going to choose this one for this demonstration called client page. I'm going to go ahead and put an X right there or check mark, hit OK. And now I've applied the stereotype. We're going to hit OK. And now we see this icon pop up here in the element for representing a page, in this case, a client page. If you were to double click in the diagram itself and then go to elements, you can unselect use stereotype icons, right? And we're going to do that and hit OK. As soon as we do that, we get client page surrounded by guillemets or guillemets if you're from Texas, or what I just refer to as double chevrons, all right? So that represents a stereotype on an element. Let's go ahead and bring in another class element. Just going to let this one go right here. And here in our property window, we're going to choose a stereotype from here. Hit the triple dots here and open up this dialog again. And we're going to choose microservice. This is a custom stereotype. We'll talk more about that later in the video. I'm going to select it and hit OK. All right. And you can see the shape changed. And that's because we introduced a shape script. And again, we'll talk about it later in the video. Let's go ahead and draw a connection between this element and this element. So In this case, I'm just going to grab this arrow up here, drag and drop it, let go on this element, and let's just choose association. You can choose any connector type you want. All right. You'll notice that you also have the ability to select a stereotype. All right. And if you double click this and open it up, you can see we have the ability to select a stereotype from here. I'm going to go ahead and cancel, and I'm going to cancel out of that. Let's do it from this properties window here. So stereotype, and then what we're going to do is search for a stereotype we want to use. Let me look first. Subscribe. We'll just choose this one. It's faster for the video. Keep the video short, right? And then hit OK. So now we have a stereotype applied to the connector. Notice that over in the browser, and let me just drag and drop the browser over here. We're just going to put it right here. These elements have the stereotype next to them. If we were just to bring in an element, and this time, let's choose a component element, right? So go in here, I'm going to change the toolbox to component and bring this one in. We'll put it right here for a moment. All right, so we have a component in here, and you can see it over here in the browser. Doesn't have anything next to it. So let's select it, and you'll notice in the properties window, we have stereotype. And what we're going to do, we're going to reuse the same stereotype client page, right? And then we're going to hit OK. Now, client page, again, with the double chevrons, is applied to the top. If we were to go back into the diagram properties, go to element and turn use stereotype icons back on and hit OK, there's actually an element just like this underneath the icon provided in this UML default shape from OMG, right? In this case, Sparx is following OMG standards, and this is what the element looks like. It's got a little component icon to the left, all right? And so I can't see the stereotype that's applied, and I don't know directly that it is a stereotype, all right? Outside of looking in the browser for component, it also has client page on it. So there's something that you can do if you want to keep icons turned on. You can right click on this, go to appearance, enable info view, right? Now I go to a different view. It is a rounded corner rectangle. It still has the component icon up here, and it says component with the client page stereotype chosen for this component. So you have lots of options to paint your elements within your models to represent what you want to do. And I changed this at the element level, not the entire diagram. Not everything went into info view, right? So lots of approaches that you can take. Let's change our toolbox again, hit the hamburger up here, and let's choose requirements. Let's bring a requirement element in. I'm going to drag this element right in here underneath component. And you can see if I look over in the browser, there it is. There's no stereotype. But let's do something here. Let's double click on this, open up properties, and look at type. And when you go in type, you have some defaults in here, display, functional performance, and so on, right? I don't see stereotype as a selection to change. However, I'm going to cancel out of this. If I have this selected and I'm in the properties window, I have stereotype. So what we're going to do here is we're going to hit the triple dots, bring up some options here. And by default, with these perspectives in this profile, and you can play around and select different profiles and play along, or you can go to all perspectives and look at different profiles and stereotypes from different perspectives. But let's just leave the default in here. And you know what? I'm going to use client page, right? And we're going to hit OK. Now you'll notice that it does not show up in the element itself. Client page has been selected in the properties window. I can go outside, get out of focus, focus, and there is what the properties window looks like with client page. And if I look over in the browser, I see client page as a stereotype for this requirement. So we've extended this requirement, say, hey, this is a requirement for client page or client pages or simply UI. All right. So you can also right click in here, go to appearance, enable info view again, and you can see it in this view where I have the requirement icon in the upper right of this rounded corner rectangle. It is a requirement. I haven't named it yet. Requirement 1 is the name. The type is requirement, and the stereotype is client page. So again, lots of different ways you can slice and dice your elements in Sparx and UML. Now back on the requirement one, let's now look at the type. So let's go up to, let me just double click and open up properties again. There we go. You'll see that the type, it doesn't say stereotype, it just says type is client page. And if I hit the down arrow, I have all of these selections, but the type has been filled in Sparx as client page. Well, what if I wanted a stereotype of client page to apply to requirement elements? How do you do that? Let's go ahead and cancel. We're going to go to settings tab again, UML types. And in here, we have client page right here, but it's applicable to a class element. We also saw it was selectable for a component. And when we look here and we're going to apply to, we're going to sort. See, here's all your class elements, and here's your components. And there's no client page here, right? So evidently, Sparx has that canned within their library that's not exposed in UML types. So you want to be careful when you're creating stereotypes that you don't duplicate what else is in Sparx. So sometimes it can be kind of difficult to see whether something exists. So first best practice is to make sure that when you're creating a stereotype that it is not already within your tooling. All right, so let's go down a little further because we're going to do one for a requirement. So we're going to go all the way down here for requirement. We have a custom in here for testing, right? We have a functional requirement. This looks like it's canned. Testing looks like it's canned as well. So you notice when I select it, I have the stereotype name and it's uppercase, right? Normally we use lowercase, except in this case, they're uppercase, which tells me this was created by Sparx and not me, all right? So the practice is to use lowercase. You'll see everything else is lowercase, but these two are types that are used in requirements that are exposed within the library for UML types. We're going to create a new one. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the new button right here. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to call it client-page because we want to be consistent on how they're naming it. So if I go and sort this, I can see client page doesn't have a dash, it just has a space. So I want to keep them the same and do it like that. Group, we're not going to talk about. You can always hit help. It's a more advanced area. You can help button and it will tell you what each one of these fields does. But the base class is blank and we're going to hit this drop down. So you see how we have all of these selections here, base class of elements. And what we want to do is we want to go all the way down here and look for requirement, right? See requirement right here. And we're going to select it. Now, another best practice is please do not create stereotypes without describing them. And I want to be very clear because I'm going to delete this later on. This is a test stereotype, and I'm just going to use ST for a requirement rec item. All right, just do something like that and then hit save. All right, so now look at here. It has been saved. And the it applies to requirement with the note stating what the purpose of the stereotype is for. All right. So, we can sort, we've sorted by client page, and we have two here. One applies to class, one applies to requirement, yet we know that client page was also selectable in our session for component. And I don't see a type component here for this particular stereotype. Let's move some things around. I'm going to put my browser over here. I'm going to put this component over here. We'll probably remove them later on. And let's bring in another requirement. So I bring in the requirement. It is in its default shape of a requirement. And I'm going to double click it. We'll come back and do it within the properties window as well. Double click it and then go to type. There is nothing that says client page, all right? So requirements is not an element that by default shows within that dialog. However, if I go here to stereotypes, select this, we have client page that applies to requirement, as well as class. It'd be separated by commas in here. And let's go ahead and select it, right? So I'm going to hit OK. And just as before, it doesn't show up, right? And if you want it to show up in the browser, let's just go ahead and select the element that we want to. We're going to hit Alt-G. In the browser, it has stereotype next to it, right? And again, if we want to, we can go to Appearance, enable Info View, and here we see the stereotype next to the element type requirement, and we didn't change the name, right? We just took the default requirement 2 with the requirement icon in the upper right-hand corner. So how did I get this shape here, on this particular element, right? And to do that, and I have a video on that, I include the link and you can go to, I'm going to go to UML types. And what we're going to do is we're going to go to microservice in here, and you can see it has a shape script. Shape script is chosen, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to hit edit. Now, again, I have a video that shows how to create a shape if you want one, right? And if you go to client page, that also had let's go ahead and save. That also had a shape script, right? So in client page, it has a shape script, but it's buried within the Sparx code as a meta file, right? And I'm not going to get into that in this channel, but this is how, I'm going to close this. This is how these various shapes are made. Just take an element, let's bring in a package one. So it doesn't say stereotype for this. I'm going to go ahead and close this because we're not going to put anything in it. In this package has this shape. And if you were to look in the UML types, let's look for package all the way down here. There is no stereotype for package. Every element has the ability to apply and extend the element to represent something in UML according to the Open Management Group, OMG's standards, all right? So want to share how to create shapes if you want, your own custom shapes, and now you learned how to create your own stereotype. Now, I wouldn't have done this. I am going to go up to stereotypes here, UML. I am going to go to client page for requirement, and I am going to delete it. It is gone, right? Now, what's interesting is that the stereotype has been written already to the database, but it is not available. It is available for class, but it is not available for requirements. So it can get a little bit confusing because you're looking at this going, well, it's checked. I'm going to uncheck it, close it, and the stereotype is gone. Oh, I didn't want to do that. I'm going to go back. It's not here. Cancel. I'm going to go to properties and go to stereotype. It is not here. Remember, it had requirement, comma, class, for various elements. The secondary class might have been for a component, which might be sub-references of the class. But the bottom line is that, oh, I don't have it. And if you wanted to do that, you'd have to cancel. You could do this. We're going to double click on this again. We're going to come in here and we're going to type client page and then hit OK. There we go. It's writing the database and I have it back. All right. Now, if I go to stereotypes again, first off, it's in the types now. Doesn't show up in the drop down, but it's in the type window here, which can be confusing to some. But in stereotypes, it's here. If I select this, I have client page class, but I don't have requirements. Let me cancel and let's go ahead to settings, UML types, again to client page. When we manually created the stereotype, it did not write to the UML types in the database. It only applied to the element within your instance in Sparx, right? And it would be carried over if you were to export this via XMI or other methods and then imported. This stereotype is written in the objects table for this element and it's applied there manually, right? It's not going to be available for other requirements when you're bringing those in. All right, so let's wrap up here. Congratulations, you did your first stereotype. And I want to go over some best practices before we close here. So number one, do not create stereotypes in your team instance, all right? Create them in a local. Your other team members won't understand the stereotype, and you can start polluting your stereotype inventory if you're not careful. So make sure you're managing your stereotypes on a regular basis. And when you're publishing, let's say, for instance, you created one or more stereotypes, you introduce them to your model admin and your governance team, whoever's managing your reference data and stereotypes and scripts and other custom things that you're doing in a staging environment so they can test and vet it before it's moved into your production environments, all right? So the second one is stereotype name is in lowercase. Make sure that happens. Group name is optional. Don't use it unless you know what you're doing, so be very careful there. Always type a description, right? You're going to think you're being fast and productive. You're going to create a bunch of stereotypes that extend what your modeling objective is. Make sure you're putting a description in there. Sometimes I even put my employee ID or my name in there to let others know it was authored by myself, all right? So do not duplicate is the next one, stereotypes. Make sure you don't have something that can closely represent what you're trying to extend, but make sure you don't duplicate stereotypes. When you're creating a stereotype, I mean, one big one is if we double click here on the association and we go to stereotypes, and then we go to all, and then we go to UML, tag value is a stereotype that I created right here. It's in camel. And I want to make sure that we don't already have something. It might be tags or something like that for a connector. It might be enhance because you're trying to do software estimating, get an understanding of easy to complex connections between systems and those kind of things. All right. So I think that's very important before you start getting into customizing stereotypes and putting them out there. All right. So I know this video was long. I had to make it long because when I start getting into stereotypes, especially if we unleash other modelers in creating their own stereotypes, this can become a mess very quickly. So follow the best practices I talked about and have some fun though. Work in your local environment, play around, learn, and do things that fit your shop's or your company's objectives, all right? Don't be afraid to mess things up. Always back up, and you should be good. So until that next episode, happy modeling.